Hey everyone, we'll get back to the podcast in a second, but first I have a new novel out, Holtman Arms. It follows Colvin Hall, an aspiring writer who decides to write a romance novel on a whim, sends it to a publisher, and it becomes a huge success. The only problem is, no one knows it's him because he writes under the pen name Mary Ballantyne. With all of the money and none of the fame, Colvin longs for the world to recognize his accomplishments. When he gets an opportunity to write a freelance article on a washed-up 90s pop star looking for a comeback, that recognition starts to come, but is it all he hoped for? It doesn't matter because he's getting it whether he likes it or not. Holtman Arms is the second in my author's cycle after A Girl and a Gun, and like that previous novel, it explores themes of success and accomplishment in the 21st century. You can buy it now through Amazon in paperback or on Kindle. The link is in the podcast description. As always, thanks for your support. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Direct-to-Video Connoisseur podcast. As always, this is Matt here, and I am joined once again by Tom Jolliffe, screenwriter and also article writer for Flickering Myth. But as a screenwriter, that's kind of mostly what we're here to chat with you about today, because your newest movie, Renegades, is out in the US now, and then it will be out on January 30th in the UK. Welcome back, Tom.
Hi, Matt. Thanks for having me on again.
Yeah, I'm excited to chat with you about this. I think we had planned for it possibly to coincide more with the U.S. release, but then the screener got sent to my spam folder, so I didn't get it in time. So it ends up working out that we can do it ahead of the UK release.
Yeah, I think that works out for me. That's all right.
Perfect.
I hadn't seen it by that point, so I've managed to see it in the meantime.
Oh, yeah, so that helps. So that's an interesting piece of this, right? That it's kind of an interesting piece as a writer that like if you write a novel or an article or an essay or anything like that, right? You get to see the finished product, but with a movie, you write it, but you don't see, and you have to actually watch it to see what it looks like.
Yeah, exactly. And then you get an idea of how much is of what you wrote is left. So thankfully on this, it's a fair amount, so I'm quite happy.
Yeah, I had a hunch it probably was, and of course, the previous film of yours that we talked about, When Darkness Falls, obviously that one was yours because it was more of a collaborative thing.
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of like, I guess, an associate producer on that one, so I was fairly hands-on. Yeah, less so on this one, but we spent quite a lot of time in pre-production. Just going back and forth on the script. So by the time it was ready to go, I don't think, logistically in these kind of productions, you want to change too much anyway at the last minute, because, it could take time and it could eat into your schedule. So yeah it was, pretty much all there.
Yeah, well, that's great to hear. So maybe we'll kind of just get stuck in, and that might kind of be the first question that I have is maybe where the story idea came up where the story idea came from. But I'll do a quick synopsis for people that aren't sure. I'm just going to go right from the IMDb one, just because I think that's easier because it has the perfect amount of information, I think. We have got a retired Green Beret soldier played by Lee Majors who's murdered by an international gang in London headed by Louis Mandylor. So his veteran SAS comrades, which are Billy Murray, Ian Ogilvy, and Paul Barber, and then Nick Moran, who is the son of one of his comrades, they decide to go out and avenge his death. And that's really kind of where this thing takes off, is that they go and take down this gang here. And
Yeah, for me, this movie was just as fun as that description is with that cast and everybody. It was just a really great time.
Yeah, I mean that's what we were going for. So it's very much a kind of movie that does what it says on the tin, and we wanted to make the best of it with the cast as well. It's always going to be a group of talent that's going to impress people, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the most important thing. I think with a movie like this, like obviously there's some budgetary constraints. I think when people see it, there might be some areas where, like for example, there's CGI used for the shooting and the bullets and the blood and the explosion. And for me, I'm okay with that if I've got a cast that's just a ton of fun to watch and a story that's just really simple and works and has elements that has depth to it and elements, but the basic story of it is simple. I think when it all comes together and works like that, that's really what I'm looking for in a movie.
Yeah, I agree. I think what we really wanted to do is, for the most part, I was writing around, who was going to be playing particular characters. So I kind of wrote to their strengths. And, it's about making the characters engaging. So, we give them a platform and then they can kind of add their magic to it.
Yeah, well, maybe this is a good segue for maybe my first question, actually, in terms of the writing piece of it. One of my favorite scenes is kind of right at the very beginning, where we get Nick Moran having a nightmare about his time in Iraq, which was just a really, really powerful scene there. Was that your idea? Was that one that you put together?
Um, it was kind of like a collaboration, really. I think we wanted to have something at the opening that was kind of visually interesting, and could kind of kick us into kind of like what's going to happen in the present day. So we kind of came up with the PTSD angle, um, and that kind of that really establishes his character from the beginning, and then we can kind of go into where he's in the group therapy session. So that kind of makes sense. Um, yeah, so it kind of came maybe a few kind of drafts into the process where we weren't quite sure where how we would open the film.
Yeah, I thought it was a really great way all around because I think it develops Nick Moran in a way that's just very like sort of like it doesn't take a lot to unfold. It doesn't take a lot out of the plot that you need for it. It happens really rather quickly, but it's very intense and it kind of gets you on his side. The other piece of it, though, I also liked. Again, here in the United States, and I don't know if this is similar in the UK, but especially in the '70s with the Vietnam War, there was a kind of a reductive approach to using PTSD, which I don't even, it wasn't even called PTSD at that time, but this idea of sort of like the mentally broken soldier that could, kind of be do anything at any time, maybe have delusions or see hallucinations of the war, that kind of thing, and it sort of just it painted a bad picture of veterans here in the U.S. And we kind of see it sometimes too, I think, with the Iraq and Afghan war. That again, with especially direct-to-video movies that are working on a short script, they don't have a lot of bandwidth to handle it in a really great way. And I think that's one thing that I appreciated about this use of PTSD as part of the of Nick Moran's character is that it wasn't reductive like that. That it still kind of painted him as a complete person.
Yeah, and I think the whole thing with the group sessions as well. That has an element that he's trying to deal with that in a constructive way as well, and it also helps build that bond between the characters.
Yeah, which again, right when we get the plot point where Lee Major's character is killed, it's kind of an obvious turn, right? That it doesn't take a lot of prodding for them to want to do this. Which again, I think when you're dealing with only a 90-minute movie, it's it's easy, I think, from a pacing standpoint to maybe put too much whatever in there, and maybe weigh down the film. And is that something you're cognizant of as you're writing pages that like, okay, I can't write this for too long because I could lose my audience?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's probably more something that Jonathan and Daniel were wary of because you know I tend to kind of start big, so I might start with a like 100-page draft, and then we true it back. I prefer doing that than the other way, where if you come in at maybe 80 pages and you've got to start filling it, because then if you're filling it, it feels a bit awkward. Whereas cutting back, I think, feels a bit more natural. So they're very on the money in terms of what you need to put into a 90-minute film. So from that regard, it was a good learning process as well.
Yeah, because I mean, it does work out really well, and that might be something too. I know because with director Daniel Zerilli, I've had some of his films on the site, and I think also I don't know how much the previous films of his that I've done on the site have been the kind of collaborative process that this was, where he also has it's not like he's just sort of given a script by a line producer, and I guess in a lot of cases he's the line producer in a lot of movies too, but it's with that more collaborative process, I think it also kind of worked in his favor. It seemed like that he was able to hit certain pieces of it out of the park.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, he came on so I came onto it in, I think, May. So it was sort of just around about the start of the pandemic. And I'd been talking to Jonathan about the film, and it was a little bit more. I mean, it had Lee Majors was in it from the beginning, so he was kind of like nailed down because he's a good friend of Jonathan Softcox, and he was there, and then quite a few of the other casts were there. Ian Ogilvy as well, who's worked with Jonathan in the past, and then a few weeks after, Daniel came on board, and that's when it kind of expanded and got a bit more international. Just in terms of we didn't make a big thing of the whole network that's beyond what's in our film with the villain. So we have hints that there's a wider villain somewhere out in the ether somewhere, but we didn't want to kind of bog that down either. So we hinted at this kind of wider network, which obviously that in a potential sequel that can come up maybe. But we tried to keep it very tight. But yeah, Daniel kind of came in. He was very involved, and Jonathan was quite happy for Daniel to kind of have the final say, because he's been there and done it, and almost wrote the book on these kind of films. So we kind of we all sort of collaborated, and then we sort of said to Daniel, right, this you've got the kind of final tick off, I guess.
Yeah, so with that in mind, right, that he had that final say, were you surprised, or were you kind of expecting as much of your movie or of your script to end up in the movie?
Well, I think what I would say probably 75%, 80% of what I wrote is there. There was a couple of things so some of the actors would do a few ad libs here and there. Nick Moran in particular, he probably made me look quite good actually. Some of his ad libs. No, he really kind of got into the character. The other guys, they added their own kind of touch of humor maybe, because we had a bit of humor in the script from the get-go, but then sometimes an actor can bring their own kind of personality to it, or their own kind of thoughts on the character, and it just kind of takes it off the page a bit more. So aside from a bit of ad-libbing, there was also a couple of structural things. So there's a bit towards the beginning where we're establishing Gorham's character, with like a sort of short montage and him kind of laying the law on some of his rivals. That came a little bit later in my script, but Daniel, via the edit, so this is another stage of like scripting, I guess, is when you're editing. He brought that forward, and I think that was more effective that way, actually. So again, I tip my cap off to someone who's been doing this for sort of nearly 25 years.
Yeah, right, because I think, didn't he intersperse the scene where Louis Mandylor is sort of torturing some rival gang member? He interspersed it with the element with the scenes of Nick Moran talking at the group session.
Yeah. So yeah, originally they would have come slightly after that. But I think establishing that his villainy, so right from the off as well, that was more effective, I think.
Yeah, I thought that was really good there. And I also, what I liked about it too, is that Nick Moran, kind of speaking about Nick Moran and his performance, he's giving sort of an intense scene there where he's talking about his experience in the war and coming home to sort of convert to civilian life and the issues he's having there. And in an action movie, while it's intense, probably like and might work like in an sort of a indie art house film, you might be coming and expecting it, but in an action movie, it's a different kind of intensity that you don't usually see. Whereas what Louis Mandylor is doing is your standard action movie, baddie, torturing somebody. And I think the way those two were mixed, it kind of made the Nick Moran piece feel a little bit more natural in an action movie for me. And so I definitely like the way that those were juxtaposed.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that I would imagine that was probably in Daniel's thought process as well, because you want to keep these things quite interesting rather than you could have like a whole long sequence where it's just the group session, then you can go into the kind of montage of the criminals, but then it might feel a little bit flat in both cases maybe. So whereas he's mixed them together slightly, it just keeps things interesting, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that really worked. And getting back to Nick Moran, it feels like with the Shogun film, because he did Nemesis as well, and it feels like he really relishes the roles that he's getting with Shogun, because they're not the sort of standard guy in a suit at a pub who has a criminal network that he's whatever. A lot of the movies that he does, he's more of a gangster type character, more of a heavy. And it seems like he's really enjoying sort of sinking his teeth into these parts.
Yeah, definitely. He's always been one of those really kind of underrated actors, I think. So, he obviously got a big name for himself after Lock, Stock, and then for a while you end up getting offered just the same kind of things. He's popped up here and there in smaller parts and always been really interesting to watch. So I think it's good that he's had these more kind of substantial roles with Shogun. And, as soon as we knew that Nick was going to be the lead in this, I was really happy personally, because I've always found him really underrated, and, I knew he would nail the role.
Yeah, it's funny. I was writing up a review on the Steven Seagal movie Gut Shot Straight, which is sort of a noirish film. I don't know if you've seen that one. It's a kind of a noirish thing. It's not really.
I think that's one I never quite got around to, because he's sort of like a bit part, isn't he?
Yeah,
Seagal.
exactly.
Yeah.
It's almost like a Seagal completist kind of film, because it's really not his movie, but it's got Stephen Lang in it. It's a noirish film where Stephen Lang is a rich guy in Vegas who gets actor Georgie gets Georgie's character to have sex with his wife. It's kind of one of those things. But I was looking up Stephen Lang, just seeing if I had reviewed another film on the site, and a movie called The Proposal from '01 came up, and that one had Nick Moran in a big a larger role, and that was kind of a reminder for me too that he had a career previous to Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels. It was like, I guess it was around that time, but he was he had roles that weren't just playing the heavy all the time. But I think it was like one of those things where it was like, for a DTV movie, it's easy to slap him on the tin and say, yeah, Nick Moran from Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, Vinnie Jones, Lock, Stock, and that kind of thing. And it just, it feels like watching him in the Shogun film. This one in particular, I think this one even more so, because I think he had more to do here. He just seems to really take the material and really go for it.
Yeah, and I think what he does is he does something that's kind of uniquely him, with his line delivery and things like that. He's got his own unique kind of style that really fits the character and makes the character come alive.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, and I think I mean, I was kind of hoping for. I was kind of again, Nemesis kind of gave me and anybody out here who's listening to that, Nemesis is another one that you should check out from Shogun. It's very different from this in the sense that it's more of a slow burn kind of film, where this is more of a traditional fun actioner that I think the way I described it on Twitter, I think when I posted the review and somebody would comment, I think it maybe even the Shogun account had commented, but I was, this is a kind of a movie that's made by action fans for action fans. I think it's the best way to sum up Renegades, whereas Nemesis is more of a slow burn kind of taut kind of film.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I would agree with that, and it's certainly on the action fans making an action film, definitely.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's Nick Moran, getting kind of a similar or a part that he can sink his teeth into still. I think was still really great to see. And then I think what I also really liked, and from a writing standpoint and a performance standpoint, was that okay, we've got Nick Moran's character that's more of a serious character, and he is well rounded. He's three dimensional because I think there's a problem with a lot of modern direct to video, especially one that's produced here in the States. Is that it's there's sort of this idea of this sort of bearded grimacing white guy, former special forces guy, who's the hero and really has nothing going for him beyond that piece, and it's just sort of kind of slapped out there. And I think that could have been a trap too, where with the hero here, because again, Nick Moran's bearded, he's white, he's grimacing, all of those things, but he brings more to it. And I think also from a writing standpoint, adding in the scene at the beginning of the film where he has the nightmare, the scenes of him at the where he's at the session. The group therapy session, I think it brings it a little bit past that, which I appreciated. And then with the team of guys with him, they almost like kind of cut some of the seriousness as well, where you've got Billy Murray, Ian Ogilvy, and Paul Barber having a lot of fun with it, which I really appreciated.
Yeah, I mean, that was, part of what we wanted. We wanted that kind of that ensemble feel. Just like those old classic adventure movies and, these action ensembles where, there's a bit of, banter between the group. Also, the kind of, the concept of these, old guys in their 70s going up against a criminal gang. We wanted them to sort of acknowledge that it's, a bit far-fetched themselves, but, they still go kind of, they're quite happy to go out in a blaze of glory if necessary. So yeah, we had a little, there was a little bit of sort of tongue in cheek there, but we didn't want to make it a spoof, so we still wanted to have it grounded and just an enjoyable homage to those kind of old films.
Yeah, because there is a kind of a fine line. Because I think again, like a lot of times, the way that this kind of movie might be made in other DTV circles, and I think this is one of those areas where I think Shogun tends to zig, and other studios kind of zag in this way, is that there might be a tendency to make it all too serious, and I think a lot of times in America, that kind of movie, it's like, okay, maybe it's Nick Moran's wife and kids that are killed instead of like Lee Majors, his character, and then all of his buddies, his war buddies, are like, hey man, we're here behind you, we're going to take care of this, and there really isn't any of that fun element. Whereas here, you've got, I mean, all of these guys, of course, they all cared about Lee Majors' character, and there's no point where they're like, we're not doing this for this purpose. But you get these fun scenes of, Billy Murray's character showing what weapons he has, and they're kind of these goofy different things. Or the scene where they're doing surveillance at the club that Louis Mandylor owns, and it's Nick Moran and Paul Barber at the bar, are getting a drink, and even those interactions were a lot of fun, and Ogilvy, of course, also a lot of fun too. And yeah, I just really appreciated that. Again, it was one of those things where it seems like such a simple concept to have really fun good guys and a really evil baddie and just watch them interact, but it doesn't always work. And here it just worked really well.
Yeah, I mean, as a writer, I kind of try my best to give them the platform to do that. So, we have these fun scenes and we have fun moments where they're quite aware of how old they are. I think, you get some of these films maybe where, Sylvester Stallone, as much as I love him, they never quite acknowledge maybe that some of them they do, but they don't always acknowledge that he's, 75, and it's a little bit far-fetched maybe. But, I think this was important, that we wanted to kind of acknowledge that, not make fun of it, but still find ways where it felt, logical, and how they approached how they were going to take down Louis Mandylor.
Yeah, and I think that it all worked on that scale, right? That it was that while they were talking about how old they were and how they hadn't really done anything like this in a while, there was also that sense of like, Yeah, but we can pick it back up, or we can do it. And again, I think there was elements like Nick Moran's character kind of resigning himself to this idea that this is all I'm good at, which is kind of almost a sad piece of it, where he's, but also kind of a thing where it's like, yeah, he's just going to go in there and get after it and do what he needs to do. Whereas for the other guys, they're kind of like, yeah, we're getting the band back together almost. It's like a reunion tour or something like that, which was the way that they played that out was just a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like the Stones getting back together to do like a big concert again. Maybe they're not quite as good as they were, but then people start underestimating them, or their expectations go right down, and then they come out and surprise you. So it's kind of like that element, really, where the police never really kind of, until it's a lot later on, they never really identify these old guys as potential suspects, because they think, well, what are they going to do? And it kind of dawns on Goran a little bit too late as well, who's taking down his organization.
Yeah, and yeah, I thought even that was a great element too. And I think maybe this kind of gets into this piece that you talked about, where when Daniels really gets involved. Now he's able to bring Michael Pare and Danny Trejo in, and you're kind of tasked with writing some extra scenes for them. And one that I really liked was how you got Michael Pare into this, or is it Pare or Pare? I never know which is the proper pronunciation. But yeah, but that was one where you kind of have this scene with Janine Narissa Southcott where she's talking to him on the phone, and I really appreciate it. Was that sort of an idea that you had to maybe give her character a little bit more in bringing him in?
Yeah, I think so what it was a little bit of kind of fortune, I guess, that Daniel's probably got quite a long list of contacts on his phone, I guess. Basically, I think in the States there was just a gap between coming out of lockdown restrictions before going back in again, and then it just so happened that these guys were available. So Trejo had like an afternoon free, Michael Pare had a day free, and then Tommy Lister, who sadly passed away a few weeks after he filmed his role, sadly. So it was probably his last role. So yeah, they just happened to have an availability. Daniel was there and he could shoot. He had the means to shoot. So we kind of added something in quite, quickly. And again, because I know I'm writing for Danny Trejo, I can write something that suits him. And the same with Lister, and the same with Pare. So yeah, it's just writing to their strengths, and then obviously it made sense to give Janine's characters a little bit more in the film as well, because I kind of liked that little sideline that she has with Paul Kennedy, who plays her partner in the film. It's almost like a reference to these old like British TV cop shows that used to be really popular in the sort of the 80s and 90s. One of which Billy Murray was really famous for, called The Bill.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so it's our kind of like little reference to that as this sideline that's happening, concurrently with the film.
Yeah, I appreciated that too, because so the thing I liked about Janine's character in this was that it like you said, it's that kind of a character, and there's sort of two ways that it can be played in a movie like this, where it's like her and her partner are always one step behind the heroes, and they're kind of almost like kind of fumbling through the film. Or when we get the scene with Michael Pare, where Michael Pare is giving her the background on who these guys are, who the gang is that's going after Louis Mandel, or who our heroes are. It's almost like she kind of makes a conscious decision where she's saying, okay, I could arrest all of these guys, and they're probably not going to kill me, right? They're the good guys. If I go in and say you're getting arrested, they're not going to kill me. But if I do that, I don't have the goods on Louis Mandel, because we've already had that scene established, right, where she goes to question him about Lee Majors' death, and realizes he's got an alibi, he's got all of that. So he's just going to keep doing this. So it's almost like she makes a conscious decision to see if this gang can pull it off. I mean, she even asks Michael Pare, can they do this? Could they make this work? And I like that, because it gave her character a little bit more agency, as a detective and as a police, as a cop. And it wasn't kind of just this sort of bumbling, two steps behind character. And even at the very end, right, the way she questions the heroes about what happened, she's almost giving them their alibi sarcastically, but also like in a way to be like, okay, we're okay. And then of course we see the scene at the very end. They're kind of together. So yeah, I really appreciated that.
Yeah, I think, we wanted to make, a lot of the characters here quite interesting, give them something to do. We didn't want her just to be sort of appearing every now and again, not really contributing to the plot. So that was very important. And obviously Janine, as someone who is running her own company essentially. So, she wants her roles to be interesting and stand out as well. So, it made sense for her to be the one kind of engaging with Michael Pare, and then we could kind of hint at a little bit of past between them as well, which gives it another kind of interesting element as well. But yeah, I just think it was almost opportunism, just to get them in. We filmed those portions. Those portions were filmed out in the States. About 6 months before the actual main bulk of the shoot, which happened in the UK.
Yeah, I really liked your approach to getting those scenes in, because it almost kind of felt like almost like in a video game where the characters have like side areas to get information or something like that. And so I actually kind of appreciated the way it put it, because I think sometimes when this kind of thing happens, as you're describing, sometimes that scene feels like it was tacked on, or the scenes were tacked on, or kind of just sort of put in there. It's like, oh, we've got to get Danny Trejo in here, so we'll just have our main character meet him at a bar and or whatever. Whereas this was almost like, Ian Ogilvy's going to get more information, so he goes to Danny Trejo to get more information. Or, Janine Narissa Southcott, she needs more information, so she calls Michael Pare, who, like you said, there's like a kind of a past there. And I kind of appreciated that approach to it, as opposed to just like, it didn't feel like it was tacked on. It felt like almost like, as in a video game, you're going on a side quest to get extra information, or to get an extra piece that you need to solve the game.
Yeah, I mean, we wanted it to feel kind of seamless when it was all put together. And again, it's a more interesting way than maybe, if you don't have the likes of these guys, you can sort of start getting too far away from your main plot line by having, her having to try and find this information out other ways. And then you're wasting a lot more screen time doing that. Whereas, you can get Michael Pare in, and then it's an efficient way to do it. And obviously you've got the star power as well.
Yeah, and it felt almost like he liked the role better than I think some of the roles that he might be given in a similar circumstance. Like, he seemed to be enjoying playing this CIA operative that is out on a mission, who then gets the phone call from her, and which I also appreciate. I think sometimes with that kind of a role, sometimes I don't want to say the actor mails it in, but they kind of work to the material, and he seemed to really enjoy this part.
Yeah, definitely. I think he's worked with Daniel a few times, I believe. So he obviously enjoys working with Daniel. He enjoys interacting with Jonathan as well, and I'm sure that won't be the last time he appears in a Shogun film.
Yeah, that'd be nice to see him in more. You guys, I definitely like. I mean, the same thing with Danny Trejo. I mean, I've seen Danny Trejo in similar circumstances in movies. I mean, I think of the movie Acceleration, where Zerilli uses him in a similar way, where I think he's like a mob boss or something that the main character Natalie Byrne goes to kill, and so it's kind of a similar thing. And I think it was actually kind of a similar sort of seamless thing there too, where he was. I think that movie for me, I think, was almost like flipped. Versus this movie, where this movie had a very simple premise and then pieces were added that gave it more depth, whereas Acceleration had a more complicated premise because they were trying to work out this deal between Dolph and Natalie Byrne's character, and it kind of almost weighed the movie down, and it was almost like they had to find ways to make it lighter or make it easier. And I think, kind of like to your point about, it's easier to kind of start from a simpler thing and add depth than it is to go the other way around.
Yeah, I think a lot, in cinema and on the big screen and things like that, it seems like audiences are coming back to this idea that they want kind of simple ideas again. I mean, if you look at Top Gun, it's a really simple idea, but obviously they've nailed the execution. So that was kind of our thinking, that we don't want to get kind of bogged down. I mean, if you're looking at, say, a lot of the Steven Seagal films of maybe like 10, 15 years ago, there would always be these subplots with like the CIA, and they would sort of weigh the film down, and the film would kind of veer off in these directions to kind of try and make these side plot lines coherent. And then you kind of get the idea that maybe in post they've cut 10 minutes off and then left a load of plot holes. So we wanted just simple revenge story, but to make engaging characters that would make it watchable.
Yeah, and to that point too, I think when like thinking about like Steven Seagal movies, for example, I know that Daniel Zarrilli's done some. I think Asian Connection was one that I know of that he did with Seagal, and I think when you have someone like a Seagal, there's a set of limitations that already come with it, right? Because he only does certain things, he'll only kind of manage, and his characters need to be depicted in certain ways, and so I think sometimes that is where like a script maybe a friend of mine Sean Malloy, who does a podcast, I Must Break This Podcast, I had him on to talk about I think it was Against the Dark. Was that the Seagal one where they fought vampires?
Yeah.
And he was joking that it was like somebody had this script for this movie, and then after the fact they got Seagal attached to it, and so they had to sort of add him in. And he was like, it's like this idea of like you've got this really great catering job, and then you're told by the people, the account, that you need to put pineapple in every dish, and suddenly you sort of like it kind of changes the whole thing. And I think kind of like with what happened here, where it's like, yes, you're writing the script, but then Jonathan Sothcott can come to you and say, hey, we've got Michael Pare, we've got Danny Trejo, we've got Tiny Lister, and you're able to sort of add it, as opposed to like you've just submitted this script and then you're on to your next thing, and they've got to figure out what to do with it now that they've got these new actors attached.
Exactly. And they were all kind of conducive to wanting to work within the film, so they everyone kind of brought their A game, and they were really interested in doing something with their roles. I think from my point of view as a fan, I really enjoyed so Jonathan and Daniel came to me and said, right, we've got Danny Trejo and we want you to write a couple of scenes with him. To me that's a joy, because I've been a fan of his for like 30 years, watching his films. So it was the same for pretty much all the main cast in the film. I had some kind of pre-existing fandom for them, so I feel also sometimes you don't necessarily feel that, where a role might be written for someone and they just put a name attached to it, but it doesn't feel like it fits them sometimes, or maybe that the writers or producers kind of understand what makes it, what makes a character work for Danny Trejo. So from my perspective, it was a joy kind of writing for these guys, and doing things that felt like it fit their their persona.
Yeah, because that was something. I don't know what your thoughts were on this, but I almost, as I was watching Renegades and I saw Michael Pare's part in the film, I almost had a thought of like, well, how would another studio perhaps have done, handled this situation? And one thought that came to my head was that they may have taken Janine's character as the detective, whittled it down so it's just really a detective behind a desk, and given that kind of a part to Pare. And that's where you start to get the unevenness, right? Because now you've taken a role that has multiple scenes that are out, in the field interacting with people, and you've now sort of had to mitigate it somehow. And that's where maybe they start adding on scenes, almost like to what you're talking about with the trying to go from 80 to 90 pages as opposed to 100 to 90. That they're now adding pages, and now you get scenes that go on too long. I think again, Bruce Willis is another situation where that Janine's character, I think it's the movie Acts of Violence, I think it's the movie, where it's almost a similar idea, and Bruce Willis does, I think, essentially have Janine's character, and I remember watching the trailer thinking like, oh, he's going to be in this a lot, and then when I watch it, he's actually not in it a lot. And I think that's another area where I think where Shogun zigs that other studios are zagging, because instead of taking that approach of like, okay, Michael Pare can play the detective, so let's just whittle this part down and give him the few scenes, and he'll just be sitting behind a desk with a badge on his, pinned to his lapel or something like that. Instead, you've got, Janine doing the part where she's bringing a little bit of edge to a role that doesn't always have edge to it, which I liked. Also, with the sort of the gender roles in the movie, just because of the fact that Louis Mandylor's character is into white trafficking, you've got that element of sort of like women being helpless and needing to be rescued that just is inherent in that. And then also, I think, Patsy Kensitt's character is just going to have to be the damsel in distress at the end. It's just sort of how the story is going to shake out. So to have a woman in the role who's very strong, who has an edge to her, who can kind of go back at Louis Mandylor's character when she's interrogating him, I thought that was really something that the movie didn't necessarily need, but I think it really helped the movie and gave it something that I didn't know it needed, I guess is maybe the way to look at it. And so, yeah, I really appreciated that kind of thing where it's like, okay, Pare gets a whole separate set of pages as opposed to maybe adapting another character to it. And then Janine can take a role that movies generally don't put a lot into, and she can put more into it and also give the film depth.
Yeah, definitely. And I think this is something that, Janine consciously wants to do in the Shogun canon, really. To have, interesting female roles in the films, whether it's played by her or not, or played by someone else.
Yeah, because I mean, Nemesis. Going back to Nemesis, I really liked her gangster's wife character, and again, like you said, like she makes the character more compelling than just simply the gangster's wife. And again, she brought some edge to that really made that whole home invasion piece really, really work on a level that that I don't think it necessarily would have. And here it's like, yeah, this role didn't have to be as fleshed out as she made it. It didn't have to. It would have worked if she was just the bumbling cop who's always two steps behind and doesn't know who these guys are and is completely in the dark the whole time. And then just shows up at the end and cleans up the mess and maybe gets credit for the bust or whatever. It would have worked if that was the case, because everything else was so much fun, right? That our heroes were so much fun. Our baddie was so bad. But the fact that she was able to do that just gives the movie just a little bit more.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, so I think it just makes it a little bit more interesting as well.
Yeah, and I guess for you, so when you were writing like that part, for example, did you know that part was going to go to her, or is it more like when you have the script fleshed out in that sense, they kind of go through and see like what part might work for her and what part might work for some of the other people?
No, so that was written from the beginning for Janine. But I think, as soon as we got into, getting Pare into the film as well, and then Stephanie Beacham came in as the kind of like the superintendent as well. So there was some quite, nice elements between, her and Pare, and then her and Stephanie Beacham as well, which kind of fleshed out her role, where for the rest of it, she's kind of like chasing the criminals down. So I think, it just fleshed things out a bit. So when Daniel kind of expanded things a little bit, it just, took things down this interesting new arc, I think.
Yeah, and I think, also thinking about her scene where she's interviewing Louis Mandylor's character, and we get to kind of see that edge that she brought to Nemesis, where she's sort of going back and forth with him. But then of course there is that part of it that I think that she also brings to it, or from a writing standpoint as well, this idea that like the police can't do exactly what they want. But even then, it's like there's that scene where she and her partner are kind of going through the aftermath of the shootout that happens in Louis Mandylor's nightclub, where a bunch of his guys get taken out by our heroes, and they're kind of trying to figure out who would have done that. And her comment about the fact that, well, it wasn't us because we weren't anywhere nearby or something like that, meaning like, who else would be capable of doing that if it's not us as the cops who are trained to be able to take these guys down. It kind of also gives you that sense that like she wants to do this to him, right? She wants to be the one to take out Mandylor, but she just can't.
Yeah, I mean, so you've got that kind of wall of the law which she has to kind of adhere to, but she still has that option to kind of take a step back. So once she realizes, and once she's kind of given the intel by Perret, she kind of takes that choice, doesn't she? So she kind of takes her foot off the gas a little bit and just gives the old boys a chance to do, you know, work their magic.
Yeah, which I really, really liked. Again, as I was saying, that I like that it's a conscious choice that she's making, as opposed to always being two steps behind. Now she's out in front. Now she has everything she needs to know where all the pieces are, and she makes that conscious decision. I thought that was a really great choice to give her character more agency, as opposed to just always, you know, sort of showing up at the scene trying to figure out what happened after the fact.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Now, one other area that I want to, because I want to get into Louis Mandylor a little bit, with his character. Now, when you were writing his character, same thing. Was it one of those things where, like, okay, we've got Louis Mandylor attached, so we'll make him an Aussie and make his, you know, kind of make him play up on that part of, you know, because he's originally from Australia, or was that character already sort of created, and then it was like, okay, we'll bring in Louis Mandylor and have him play it?
So I think what we were going to do, there was a few people that we looked at, and part of it was always also down to availability. So once we kind of figured out it was Louis Mandylor, we turned the character into an Australian. So what we wanted with the gang itself was to be, we wanted this idea that it's fairly cosmopolitan, rather than just saying maybe, it's a gang of Albanians, because then that, it might come off as looking a little bit xenophobic maybe. So if we have this cosmopolitan gang, it's a bit more interesting that way, I think. And then having him as an Australian, he's still a little bit of an outsider, but then he still knows, how everything works. And he's, there's a similar mentality in certain regards with, Australians and the Brits. So, he's kind of got that international flavor, but he still fits in the landscape as well.
Oh, yeah, that's kind of cool to know that was a conscious decision. Because as I was watching the movie, I was thinking, like, having him as an Aussie and having him, be from a Commonwealth country like that it was like he could be an outsider, but there's always, like you said, that xenophobia that's inherent sometimes in the outsiders coming in to an area. And by having him be an Aussie, like you said, having the gang be more cosmopolitan as well, where it's not just, like you said, just Albanians, or, in the United States, I think I've seen, with certain Seagal movies, or Bruce Willis or whoever, where it's like a Mexican gang or African American gang, and it just plays up on all these really horrible tropes that just, that just make it worse. And I think you kind of fall into that trap when you want to, because you want to have the gang of outsiders that are coming in, sort of invading turf. And again, with Danny Trejo's character, where he's talking about how, this isn't how gangs usually operate in London. There's usually a code that they follow, but these guys aren't following it. It's like you can kind of unpack it from all of those bad tropes, and, like you said, the xenophobia and all of that, by having Louis Mandylor be an Aussie, but yet you still get that feel of the outsider invading and these guys kind of protecting the turf that I really appreciated.
Yeah, and I think it becomes more about, attitudes and things, rather than, national identities, that in that sense of invading. So it's like this old school sensibility, tradition and values that it kind of goes through London, that even in, the past with some of the criminal organizations, they always had this kind of sense of family, I guess. So even like the mafia has that, as much as they're doing all this, criminal stuff, they have this sense of family and code. So it's this new kind of gang coming over, and they almost don't play by the rules, even though you're in a game where you break rules. There's still these, overriding rules that everyone kind of, wants to play to. And then, from the perspective of having characters like Tiny Lister, that, hints at this wider expanded world. So the other kind of side of the network that's spread over in Europe or spread over in the States, that kind of expands that network even more of the criminal organization. So I think it was more interesting to do it that way than, like you say, just have Eastern Europeans or Mexicans, or, targeting one specific group of people and kind of doing bad representations.
Yeah. It definitely, again, what it does is it kind of takes a movie that's fun and keeps it fun, I guess, that there's no feeling.
Yeah,
And I guess, in the 80s, maybe you don't think about, or whatever, in the past, not everybody thinks about some of these things, but I think it sort of keeps that element there, which I mean, it's funny for Louis Mandylor, I kind of was, oh, I don't want to say I felt bad for him, but it's like, he plays such a great baddie, which I liked, but he also, I think there's almost sometimes a tendency with people who play the baddie to really, really do it up and have a lot of fun. And sometimes it almost hurts the movie in a way because you start to like the baddie, and and you can't always root for the heroes or something like that. And I think his baddie that he plays is so ruthless that, yes, he's great to watch, but there's never a point where I was like, yeah, he's kind of cool. I kind of like what he's doing there. It's always like, no, I want to see him get his comeuppance, which I think
yeah,
that's always an important piece as well.
yeah. I mean, when I was writing that character, it was always pretty much along those lines. Um, and I kind of had, Gary Oldman in The Professional in mind when I was sort of thinking about the role. That type of, villain who's, he's played with a bit of flair and he's quite, big in the performance, but he's someone that you want to see taken down as well. And then once Louis Mandylor came onto the script, we could sort of touch things up a bit. And I was really happy from that perspective because again, he's this character actor who's really kind of underrated.
Yeah, I completely agree there because I mean, recently he's sort of been getting some bigger parts, like with, Jesse V. Johnson's been using him more, and so he's been getting those. And I mean, it's funny because you look at his CV and IMDb, he works a lot, like almost on that sort of like Eric Roberts level, but he doesn't do sort of the Eric Roberts like one and done kind of things. Like he's really in the movies. But yeah, I agree with you there. I mean, he has a very small part in Avengement, but I think of like the two debt collector movies that he did with where he's interacting with Scott Adkins. They had really great chemistry, and so when I saw that he was attached, I was excited to see what he did. But like I almost kind of feel bad because it's like seems like everybody else is having fun as the heroes, and then he has to be the bad guy that like everybody dumps on in the movie. But I guess everybody's got to play a part, right? Everybody's got to kind of take one for the team,
Yeah,
I guess.
yeah. I mean, I enjoyed the quirks that they kind of added to the character, and which I'm sure Lewis brought a certain element of that to his performance as well. That where he's really kind of he's bringing in his own kind of sense of flair to it, but also in terms of the costuming and things like that. So he's got some quite quirky costumes in this, which are pretty cool. Um, I think there's one sort of he's pretty much wearing something a little bit odd throughout, and I kind of think, I quite like that shirt.
Yes.
um, yeah, so I think he's quite an interesting character on a visual standpoint, just because of what he's wearing and how he's playing the role, and he's quite uh, he's chewing the scenery, but I think in a good way. I think you need a bit of that in some of your villains.
Yeah, I think what's great about it is he does it to the right degree, I think. And I think it's part writing, part how the character is written, and part how he plays it where he I think there's almost a sense for I think for people who I think for actors in particular when they're playing baddies, they because it's their character, they start to kind of I don't want to say fall in love with it, but they because it's their character, they treat it in a way that's almost like it's special to them, and they don't want to see that baddie get their comeuppance, or they want it to be they almost want to like the character because it's their character. And I think he does a good job of playing of walking the tightrope, I guess you could say, where he's he's giving it enough flair that it's I don't want to, it borders on fun, but it's just not quite fun. Like he's still enough of a bad guy that when he's in a scene, it's what's bad that he's going to do in the scene. Even if he's bringing some flair to it, it's like what is the menace there that's going to happen, which I appreciated.
Yeah, I mean that was what we were going for. So we always wanted to be conscious of, even if he's got some good lines and he's got the costume and everything, we wanted to pull it back and have him quite clearly he's a menace to the whole city.
Yeah, and I always joke it's almost like with human trafficking, it's almost what I always call baddie in a can, right? That's like you just I think there's a few types of bad guys that are just you don't have to really develop them as bad. It's just evil what they're doing. I think, yeah, human trafficking. I think poaching animals, animal poaching. I know like Ring of Fire 3. I always think of with Don the Dragon, where there's
Yeah.
people that are trapping animals illegal. Of course, they're always going to be bad. So it's like almost like there isn't a lot to develop as a baddie there. But then also, I think sometimes from a writing standpoint and from a filmmaking standpoint that it almost sometimes engenders a lazy aspect where it's like, well, okay, I mean, how can you like somebody who's doing human trafficking, right? They're a horrible person, so of course they're bad. Whereas here, he was developed enough that he wasn't like a one note baddie, and he wasn't like just baddie in a can. It wasn't just like, okay, he's a human trafficker, nobody's gonna like him anyway. Like you said, he played it with some flair, and I think the character himself had elements to it that made his scenes compelling enough that you want to watch him interacting with the other characters.
Yeah, definitely. I think, I like to think I gave Lewis a platform, and then, I knew that once it comes to delivering the performance that he would nail it.
Yeah, and I wonder too, to some extent too, because maybe the actors themselves would know better with this, but it's almost like I think it felt like in a lot of cases with a lot of the actors working here in this film that they just liked having a role that they could sink their teeth into and do something different with, that they don't always get. That a lot of times it is sort of like, okay, this person's attached, let's adapt a role for them, as opposed to, we've got this part that we want them to really run with.
Yeah, I think, that's sometimes a benefit as well of, having such a star-studded cast that you don't really want to waste anyone. I mean, you could have maybe, if you replace 7 or 8 of the big name cast in this and then have kind of unknown actors, there might be a tendency that you kind of underwrite the roles, or you kind of dismiss the roles slightly. We tried our best, obviously, and I tried my best not to do that with anyone really that has a kind of, fairly significant part. But because you're writing for, Paul Barber or Billy Murray or Ian Ogilvy, you kind of know what their strengths are, how to make the best of them, and, what to give them that they can really sink their teeth into, so that they can make their role, even if they're not necessarily in it throughout the whole film, where they can just stand out.
Yeah, because I think it's probably a really great example of like Paul Barber, whose character is, I guess like really the three guys, Paul Barber, Ian Ogilvy has a little bit more just because his character interacts with Danny Trejo, but yeah, the three of them aren't in it a lot, but it feels like when they're in the movie, they're really just sort of furthering this vibe or this tone of this really fun aspect that I think. Like you said, they're making the most of every scene that they're in, and it just felt like every time they were on screen, I wanted to see them on screen. I think it maybe is the best way to describe it.
Yeah, I think, certainly, it was very much in our mind that we wanted it to be kind of enjoyable. Revenge films can get dark and they can get moody, and they can kind of go down this path where you don't always have to do the fun version. You don't always have to do the deathly serious version, but we kind of wanted to find this perfect balance where, we still had a bit of intensity, but we still had a sense of fun with it as well. So that was the important aspect. I think that's what a lot of the reviewers have picked up on, really, that they really kind of like the engagement between the Renegades themselves.
Yeah, because it does lift this beyond sort of your standard revenge movie, and I think that's probably the most important thing. Is that I think it's one of the things when you're, especially with making movies on a budget, having to sort of limited release or direct to video, is what can be done in that limited space to make something more fun and more compelling. And I think this was, I mean, I want to say, I don't want to say it's an easy choice, because again, you've got to get the names and you had to have the writing down, and Daniel's really kind of recognizing where it's working and putting it together. So it all has to come together for sure. But I do sometimes wonder if, because I feel like there's almost like more of a cynical approach to a lot of direct-to-video making, where it's just sort of like, let's just get the names on the tin and get the movie out there. And I think this approach here, where it's, Shogun Films doesn't make a bunch of movies. They're not pumping out like 5 to 10 movies a year. They can put more time into these little aspects of it, and sort of also get the actors involved, invested in a way that we get something that's a little bit more special than what you might normally see.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the company would be slightly more prolific under the right circumstances. I think Renegades itself was pushed back a few times because of COVID. Even when it got made, it was still kind of at this time where we'd just come out of lockdown restrictions. So they were quite limited still in choice of locations, availability. They were kind of limited on the crew they had. So things like the fact that a lot of the action is done with CGI, for example, is because you're kind of limited by your locations. They didn't really have the resources to kind of at that time go and maybe do a set somewhere that you could completely destroy. So you're kind of limited to the fact that you need to use CGI. You're limited by your choice of locations. So yeah, it's been sort of difficult, and we're now just sort of 2022 has kind of seen everything starting to come back. It's just been a slower process in the UK than it would be out in the States, where I think they've almost, in terms of like your Emmett and Furlers and everyone like that, they're kind of kicking into full gear again. I think we're just getting to that point now, so it should sort of obviously you don't want to oversaturate, so you don't want to be doing 5 or 6 a year, but maybe 2 or 3. And hopefully there'll just be a bit more freedom now that there's no more restrictions.
Yeah, that's something I never considered, and maybe too people in the American audience listening to this probably also didn't consider, because what Emmett, Furler, Oasis were able to do is they were able to go to red state. We was talking in America about red states and blue states, where the red states are more conservative, and conservatism sort of was not as concerned with COVID restrictions, which you say what you want for the people living in those states that may have had higher fatality rates and all of that kind of thing. But what it meant for action film watchers was that, you could still pump out 5 movies a year if you went to, like, for example, Georgia. That's where I think Emmett, Furler, Oasis, they work a lot out of Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi. So 3 like kind of deep South red states that really didn't have as many restrictions. And so they kind of took advantage of that fact and went and shot in those places to get those movies made. Whereas, in the UK, you don't have that ability. There's not the same kind of regional discrepancies in restrictions. It's sort of like what the entire UK is going to have one set of regulations, I think. And so that is probably something that I didn't really consider about the fact that when working in certain locations in the UK, right, that if you're limited, you can't always, like you said, shoot them up and set up the scenes and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, it was also a case of, the choice of locations was, a little bit more sparse, and, you start having to ask for favors. But then obviously these could be locations that aren't necessarily always coming from like a film background. So it might be a location that doesn't generally get used in film a lot. So you can't just go and wreck someone's place, much as you'd like to.
Right.
But it was coming at this time. There was just a hesitance that a lot of former locations, and maybe even Airbnbs that would be used as locations, they were kind of hesitant that they didn't want film sets and production crews back yet, even though the restrictions had kind of come off. So there was still this, like 6 month, a year hangover that we've probably only just really fully got over, where places are opening fully up again and welcoming film crews back. So the UK is naturally smaller anyway, so already you've got a bit less choice. So hopefully with everything kind of lifted and back to normal, and investment and production companies a little bit more. There's always a hesitance when suddenly someone turns off the money pump. When everything stops, that once it turns back on again, they're a little bit hesitant to kind of put money into things. They want absolute sure bets. So yeah, I think we'll see. Maybe getting to a point where Shogun does 2 or 3 a year.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess I didn't think of it too. Like when we talked about When Darkness Falls, that was such a smaller production that
Yeah.
you could find Airbnbs that would allow you to shoot in there because you didn't have this huge crew that was going to be there. You weren't blowing anything up. There's some shooting, right? And some, but it's not like at the scale of like an action movie of like, 4 guys coming in fully loaded and shooting up the place.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, from that point of view, we actually benefited from the restrictions. It was just between full lockdowns. I think they narrowly avoided one lockdown after so they found the perfect window. It was a small crew anyway, so they were underneath the restriction barrier that you had. They just made sure that they kept distance and masks and everything. But they did benefit from that because they had their location was also their base. There was a lot of outdoor locations. So again, you're kind of outdoors, you're making the most of that landscape, and it's, it plays a part in the film. And, that was a rare time where you could kind of benefit from that. And then obviously some of the locations were a little bit cheaper just for the fact that, they were happy to kind of have someone, actually giving them some money at that point, because for the UK, like a lot of places, just the economy shut down for months on end.
Yeah, and I imagine probably up in the Scottish Highlands, right, they weren't getting the tourist trips that they would expect. Whereas, like, yeah, obviously, like in London, it's a little bit of a different vibe where they don't need the money as badly, or people are still probably traveling to London for business reasons. Being obviously like probably the financial capital of Europe. I think that those Airbnbs in London were still getting people going to them because people still had to travel out of necessity and things like that.
Yeah, and I think they like I said, they were just limiting themselves to commuters and people staying for meetings and things. They didn't want anyone beyond 2 or 3 people in a room, so they were just basically completely nixed film crews and film productions. But I think from the perspective of When Darkness Falls, we also really benefited because at the time people weren't really kind of flocking out after lockdown immediately, so they were still kind of being quite cautious. And then we wanted expansive shots with no one in frame, no tourists and things, so we were kind of like we kind of benefited from the fact that there was no one there, and we could kind of play on that kind of open space.
Yeah, that's a good point, right? Because in a movie like that, right, if you've got people hanging around, they're sort of witnesses to whatever action is happening, and which is important to have, like witnesses actually add like levels of complications to a movie like that. Whereas, like, yeah, in a movie like this, you're right, like it's a kind of a different vibe. Like, yeah, that in I think I think of When Darkness Falls, I think of like the guy walking his dog in one scene. And that's a little bit different, right, than if you had a whole bunch of tourists, like a big tour guide, moving people through the town area. And it's like, now you've got 30 people who've just witnessed the one character doing something.
Yeah, and I mean, you don't have to wait for anyone to kind of go through shot, because that budget level, you can't just shut down a whole section. So they didn't get bothered by anyone, so that was an advantage. But from the perspective of Renegades, it was difficult, but they did a really great job, I think, of getting some nice locations, and making the best of the fact that there was still some restrictions in how much crew you could have and how much time you could spend in places.
Yeah, I think that by having such a great story and such a fun cast, and has such fun performances. I think it elevates it beyond those restrictions. I think I think without those elements, maybe you do focus on the restrictions more. But when it's Billy Murray, hamming it up and he shoots at somebody, it's okay that for me at least that it's CGI and not like real practical effects, because he's just so much fun to watch that the rest of it is sort of secondary for me. And so I think obviously if everybody had their druthers, they would want to be able to kind of do the full extent of the production that they could. But I think with the characters involved, I think it definitely kind of carried it over the line for that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, we kind of wanted that cosmopolitan feel, that city feel. So, that dictates where we need to, film something. So, we need to film in a pub, like an old school pub, and, these clubs and things. So, we knew from the offset that we would be quite limited in what we could do, practically. But, COVID kind of, exemplified that even more, sort of exaggerated those restraints. But I think that would probably be something that would be in mind in the sequel, where we might, take it elsewhere, say, where we can maybe have a bit more destruction.
Yeah. I mean, the thing I liked about the use of London in this film is that, I think we always talk about some of these real big world cities like, London, New York, Paris, where the city is itself a character in the film. And and I really like the approach here, where it's like you just constantly between scenes, you'd have these establishing shots that I think, maybe we've done with a drone, where you just see this beautiful London cityscape that's sort of like the one that everybody knows when they think like, oh, a friend of mine's going to London for the weekend. Yeah, I just see this beautiful, the London Bridge and going across the Thames and all of that. And they would be sort of that establishing shot of this beautiful, tourist version of London that everybody expects. And then you go down to street level and it's human trafficking, or it's, guys getting ready to have a shootout. And I think even then, like you said, almost like the limited location area almost helped in a sense, because it's like the club that Louis Mandylor's character has, where you've got Nick Moran and Paul Barber going in to do surveillance. It actually looks like a nice club from the outside. If I was on a tourist trip to London, my group walked by there, I wouldn't think that anything nefarious was happening inside there. So I really like that juxtaposition there, that the way that London was used in the film.
Yeah, definitely. I think we wanted to do something that was a bit different. So, generally London films, they're kind of like these, quirky romance films or rom-coms, or they're the kind of, gritty crime gangster film, and they're all a bit samey. So this kind of international flavor action film, but set, in London, in the kind of back streets of London, I think, it gives it a bit of character.
Yeah, I think it feels more like I think partly because I think more films are being made in the UK without sort of compromising the British aspect of them. I think Avengement may have been the first one like that was just, it was made strictly as a UK movie, as a British movie, that it didn't matter what American audiences, if they would have trouble with it being to that level. And I feel like there's kind of more movies like that being made, where it's like, I don't know if there's that's sort of a thing from distributors, where they think like, I don't know if we can market this movie in America because it doesn't have enough for Americans to like. I kind of feel like there's more movies being made that with less concern about what the American audiences are going to think about it.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I've, from doing a lot of the low budget horror films I've done, that they're made in Britain with, a British production company, but because they're sold to an American distributor, that there's always this kind of prerequisite that you need to have American characters in. And for the most part, they have to be played by British actors, because you're using kind of local talent. And, sometimes it can be a bit awkward, where the film seems unsure of itself. And I've had this with a few of my sort of horror films, when I read reviews, where people are confused whether it's taking place in the UK or whether it's taking place in America. And if it's taking place in America, it doesn't look like America at all. So it can be difficult. Whereas I think, we want to embrace the kind of British style and the sensibilities. And then obviously we had that benefit of being able to have these established kind of well-known stars. So even, you know, some of the British stars like Nick Moran, he's fairly well known in the States anyway. So, you know, people respond to that. And then obviously everyone knows Lee Majors and Danny Trejo. So, you know, that's a benefit. But I think, you know, setting it in London, you know, brings this kind of unique feel to have this kind of movie.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm thinking, you know, just in terms of like, you know, movies that have come out recently. So it's like sort of Avengement, maybe 2019 is kind of like the first one, but then I think of like the I Am Vengeance movies that Ross Boyask did with yeah, where they, you know, both of those really have an English, you know, UK feel to them. You know, Skin Traffic that Gary Daniels did was another one that really felt, even though there were American actors in it, which again, I agree with you there. Sometimes I think they kind of mitigated it a bit with, you know, having Michael Madsen and Eric Roberts, Daryl Hannah in it, but it's still like it's still very, you know, Gary Daniels is in England, which I really liked seeing him in that space like that. And here, like with this movie with Nemesis, there's a sense, I don't know, I feel like film distributors, they should trust that Americans are okay. I mean, you know, BBC America, it's like there's tons of programming, you know, that's available from the tons of Americans watch and really enjoy. You know, I guess there's probably a sense, right, that like if it's going to be BBC in America, it's either got to be like niche Doctor Who stuff for sci-fi fans, or like a Downton Abbey kind of thing that Americans won't watch anything else. And I just don't. Good film is, you know, good cinema is good cinema, and I think, you know, a movie like this, it does, you know, or Avengement or whatever it is, it doesn't have to be made for Americans to like it. I think you know, at least I'm, you know, maybe just speaking for myself as an American. Maybe I shouldn't be speaking for all Americans. Maybe because I do remember when Avengement came out that I saw some reviews where Americans were like, I don't understand what they're saying in the movie. So maybe not everybody can appreciate it, but I think a movie like this, it doesn't have to be compromised for American audiences. I think it's almost like let the American audience come to it and trust that we will come to it.
Yeah, I think, you know, I think so. That's always been my thought about it, that, you know, if you're putting yourself in unsure footing with what you want to do with the film, then, you know, you're going to lead to sort of, it's going to be more of a problem than, say, just having a British film set in Britain and they've all got British accents. But I think, you know, the distributors did have one little note, you know, when they were seeing the final film, that some of the kind of the dialogue was a little bit, they couldn't quite understand, maybe some of the slang. We didn't really put that much in it. We were quite wary of that from the beginning anyway, so you can't always win. But I think as long as you keep your dialogue fairly neutral, don't have too much kind of, you know, very distinct slang from certain places, it's a good way to do it. I think, you know, having that kind, you know, the outsiders, you know, from the international stars that are coming into sort of London with their characters, I think that kind of adds something to it. So, you know, if we were trying to sort of mimic New York, say, and film it in London, it just wouldn't have worked.
Yeah, and that's definitely something I know. I remember I was talking with Francis Rizzo III, who does a Val Kilmer podcast. I was on with him. We were talking about diplomatic immunity, I think it was, or double identity or something. It was the one that Val Kilmer did where he was mistaken for somebody else. He was like a sort of, it was like a Médecins Sans Frontières kind of thing that he was doing in Romania. But the last scene is supposed to take place in New York, and it's definitely not New York City. It's just, you know, they sort of got a mock-up of what a subway station looks like, and then the rest of it was just sort of as it was. And of course, you know, Francis is from, you know, he's from Long Island, so of course, you know, he grew up near New York City, so he recognizes it better than anybody. It's like, yeah, it's just very obvious that that's not what it is. Or I know I've seen Boston, a city that I grew up near. is, you know, shot in Montreal a lot, or even like Maine, the state I grew up in, is shot in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and it's just really obvious to be like there's no place in Maine that has like a 3-lane highway going through the middle of the city. There's no city big enough like that in Maine. That kind of thing that you pick up on. So I agree. I think, you know, but definitely a city like London, again, being this sort of real world city that everybody recognizes. I think there's only a handful of cities like that you can use in the world. But when when you use a city like that, again, it's a character unto itself. And yeah, trying to replace London for New York definitely is a really hard sell, because they're just both such big cities that are so distinct that yeah, it's I agree with you there that it's not something that looks right. It's something that the audience will pick up on and understand right away.
Yeah, definitely. I think, we wanted London to be a character. We wanted to kind of have a different kind of movie set within it, and one that had that international appeal. Make the most of it, because London is also a very cosmopolitan city. So, if you've got Lee Majors in there, and you've got Danny Trejo is in London, even though we filmed his bit in LA. Yeah. So we did get away with it with that one, that particular moment. But it makes sense to have these cosmopolitan characters throughout the city.
Yeah, and I think the Danny Trejo element, having his character not only be in London, but also be someone who's very familiar with London. He's almost like an adopted son of London, and his character in that way. I thought that also did a really great job of mitigating, again, that idea of xenophobia with the outsiders invading an area, to have him be someone who isn't an outsider, because yeah, a lot of American movies would have had him be part of the Mexican gang that's invading. Actually, I think Recoil was a movie like that. Not the Recoil with Gary Daniels, but the one that had that it was Steve Austin. I want to say that he might have been in that film, but I can't remember. But yeah, I think that idea, it also kind of helped with part of that process. That, like you said, it made London more of a cosmopolitan city, and it made the invaders not be invaders who are invading based on ethnicity or language or something like that, but invading because they don't have the shared set of values that the gangs in London have.
Yeah, I mean, that was exactly it. Yeah. And that was another, important thing about why we wanted, Danny's character to be kind of on the side of the Renegades.
Yeah, and it was, I really liked the way it came in, where he's, him and Ian Ogilvy are talking. It's almost like, Ian Ogilvy's going to him for information. And then of course there's he's used in the plot at the end, and sort of how we get to the end of the film. I won't go into that too much, just because it is, I mean, it's not too much of a twist, but again, I'll kind of let it happen organically for people watching the movie. But again, it was I think with Danny Trejo, a lot of times he gets attached to movies kind of similar to the way he was here, and it doesn't always feel organic with the way he's put in the movie. It's just like, okay, well, we can slap Danny Trejo on the tin and call it good. And I like I said, I really appreciated the way he was incorporated in the film here. And it seemed like I mean, I don't think that he ever mails it in when he does his roles. I think no matter what the role is, he comes in and does it as well as he can. But yeah, there was a sense of the way like he really seemed to relish being in this film here.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, they actually shot it in his backyard, so I think from that perspective, he was probably quite chilled and relaxed about doing it, and just enjoyed having a day's filming at the time.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it's one of those things, I think. There's so many, like, especially again thinking about like movies like Seagal does or Bruce Willis does, where they don't do their reverse shots, so that the actor is not acting in the same scene as that person, and when you're watching it, it sometimes feels a little bit off. It's funny how with this one here with Ian Ogilvy and Danny Trejo, the two of them felt like they were having a fun conversation between two people who had known each other forever, and I don't know, I appreciated that kind of that element that they were able to bring to it, that it was, it didn't feel like two people that were just sort of in separate locations talking to to whoever is sitting across from them, that know that these were two guys that knew each other for a long time, had a shared history, or had a history of some sort, and were just sort of chatting with each other. I really appreciated that.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the advantages there as well, which helped, is that Ian Ogilvy was actually over there at the time, so they're physically sharing the scene, which helps the dynamic. And I think, yeah, that would have worked better than having them filming their parts separately on separate continents.
Yeah, so I didn't know that. So they actually were together, and so he was in the States at the time. Now, was Nick Moran in the States for any of it too, or was he just in England the whole time?
No, he was fully in the UK. So Ian Ogilvy actually lives out in the States. So effectively, Ogilvy was there with Trejo when they filmed. I think they filmed around about September 2020. And then the rest of the film was shot around about May time, I think, 2021. And then that's when everyone else sort of came in. So there was just this sort of 2-week block where Daniel filmed all the US stuff, which was Trejo, Perret, and Tiny Lister. But yeah, Ian Ogilvy, because he lives out there, he was able to kind of get over there and do his scene.
So that maybe that's part of why it felt more organic than those kind of scenes do. Though, I mean, Michael Perret, of course, he's talking on a phone with Janine Nurse-Sakov. They're in separate locations, and that one also felt natural in a sense that, like, he seemed to enjoy the part. But yeah, I think even just sort of hearing the story of sort of how the film was put together, I think again it's very common, I think, with movies like this that are sort of done piecemeal, that when you get to the finished product, it doesn't feel like one natural cohesive thing. And the fact that this did, despite the fact that the challenges that were there, I think is again testament to sort of the investment that everybody had involved with it.
Yeah, definitely. I think what Jonathan and Janine have done is pretty remarkable, really, because I mean, they made, Nemesis was pretty much one of the only films in Britain being made, around about lockdown time. So they were under heavy restrictions, and then Renegades is being made in similar, not quite as bad, but similar circumstances. So it's quite remarkable that they've managed to get these two films out, around that period of time.
Yeah, and both like really, really quality movies. I mean, again, Nemesis is I don't want to say it's a very different movie from this, but it's definitely a different feel to it. Again, it's like got that slow burn aspect, which this movie did have a little bit of that slow burn to it, I think, especially initially early on. But I think as an action movie, one thing I appreciated was that it was used in a kind of in a way where it was like it would kind of build up to things, but it didn't have the same kind of longer build up that you would get like in a Nemesis, or like in especially in When Darkness Falls. Was that something too for you, where like you were kind of writing those aspects into the film, and then maybe Daniel was sort of figuring out tonally how to make them work?
Yeah, I mean, there was a little bit of that, yeah, but I think from the off we kind of knew what we wanted to do in terms of making this kind of ensemble action film that kind of, it was like a throwback to sort of Cannon films and PM films. So we always had that in mind. And then throughout the process where we did 7 or 8 drafts, some things we think we might change something, and then something changes in the cast, or like a location changes, or that we suddenly a month later look back and think, well, that still doesn't work, so then we change it again. So it was just again, some of these films might be, generally it might be something that's written, and then within a couple of months it's going to production, and then it's kind of churned out. So I think we did, with some of the delays, actually did benefit the film in the end, because we had that longer process of development.
Yeah, it's hard, right? Because I think probably every movie, right, that you make, you want to be able to give it as much time and attention as possible. But it's just sort of the reality, especially, I think I know at least in America, as you know, for myself too, it was like a learning experience for me when I started doing the site, you know, my blog site back in 2007, and also talking to other people that you know were cinephiles like me that we grew up with this idea of this sort of auteur-driven cinema that you know that this you know director, maybe like a Martin Scorsese, or even like kind of further back like an Ingmar Bergman or a Kurosawa, they come in with a vision and they're just allowed to sort of let the vision grow, and they can take as much time as they need on making it. They can take as much time as they need to edit it and all of those kinds of things. And you know, now I've understood the better reality of filmmaking, that that's not really how it works. That most movies, especially you know in the direct-to-video sphere, they aren't auteur driven. They're maybe distributor driven, or there's a line producer that's sort of keeping everything in a certain way. And the shooting schedule is really quick and often you know has to move because of you know whether it's getting the actors involved, like you know certain sets maybe you only have them for certain times, all those kinds of things. That there are a lot more restrictions involved, and so it's like you'd like to be able to take that kind of time. Everybody would like to be Kurosawa and just take as much time as they need to on their movie. But the reality isn't there. So it's like you said, in this case, maybe you had more time than you normally would on a production like this.
Yeah, definitely. I think, you know, we got the scripts pretty much to a point where we wanted it. So beyond a certain point, it would only sort of change if you know we got a new actor in a certain role, and then we would kind of craft for them. But yeah, I think that process was enjoyable. We probably had about a year between, because you know the bulk of the shoot happened probably a year or so after we began on the script. So yeah, that kind of year of being able to kind of dip back in every now and again and like tweak here and there was pretty useful.
Yeah, I imagine it would give you know so maybe even thinking Janine's character, because obviously she would have been sort of at an advanced, you know, earlier stage, right, knowing the part and knowing what she was going to do, that she would have more time to maybe even think about like, oh, what if I do it this way, or what if I play it like this, or something like that. That I guess in a normal course of things, right, an actor is going to get the script kind of closer to when they're shooting, and they don't have as much time to delve into how they would approach the character.
Yeah, definitely. And you know, as we've said, you know, that role itself kind of evolved throughout the process, you know, beyond what it was initially. So, you know, had we shot, maybe, you know, I think they'd always envisioned shooting a lot earlier than it ended up being. But I think, you know, had they shot a bit earlier, maybe her character would have been less developed than it was in the final film. Same maybe with some other characters. So yeah, I think, you know, in the end we kind of benefited from that extra development time. And I think, you know, we've had some nice reviews as well, which has been, you know, including yourself as well, which we, you know, thank you very much. So yeah, we did benefit from that in the end, I think.
Yeah, I think that is, you know, and I guess maybe from my standpoint, you know, in the review that I wrote, I think, yeah, it was definitely, there probably are aspects of it that I liked because, like you said, you were able to take more time with it and develop things further. I think that helps. I think the biggest thing for me that I really enjoyed about the movie is it just feels like there's an earnestness and a care about the movie that I think even if you were on a tighter schedule, like even if you know had to do this, you know, quicker, I think that part of it still would have shown through, which I think that's a piece that I think when it comes to sort of the churn and burn approach to DTV that I see a lot, that I almost feel like distributors maybe, you know, I think their mindset is quantity over quality, in the sense of like, if we can get 5 Bruce Willis films on a streamer site, and you know, if somebody just picks one of the 5, at least they're picking one, and we, you know, we can kind of offset those different, you know, choices there. I think from a movie watcher standpoint, there's something refreshing about going into a movie where it has that sort of that care and earnestness and love really to it, that, like I said, it was, you know, action fans making a movie for action fans. As an action fan myself, I feel like you kind of almost feel appreciated, I guess, as you're watching the film.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's always considered by distributors. And I kind of get it in the landscape where, streaming doesn't have the same kind of payouts that, DVD did, and particularly what VHS did. So you're almost having to make, 5 movies a year to, make the same as what you might have made from one film, 30 years ago. So, it is tough, but, we have to consider that we're making a product too, but we also want to make something that's good and that, people will, want to watch again. Hopefully, anyway.
Yes, no, this one definitely, I think this one more than Nemesis has a more of a rewatchable quality, because Nemesis, it's like, once you've seen it once, if you're going back to watch it, you're going back, I think, strictly for the performances, because once the story has evolved and you've seen it kind of play out, then when you watch it the next time, maybe you're looking for things that you might have missed the first time, but you kind of know what's going to happen. Whereas in this movie, yes, there are some elements of the film that might be, up for, I guess they could be, suspenseful, but for the most part, you kind of go in knowing what, once the story starts to unfold in the beginning, you kind of get a sense of where it's headed. And I think that lends itself to more rewatchability, in the sense that, like, if I go in and watch it again, I already kind of knew watching it the first time, beyond a few elements, what was going to happen, and I'm just watching it for these fun performances. And I think that sometimes helps in a movie, is when the story is sort of a simpler aspect to it. Yeah, you're kind of able to watch it more. And I think this is definitely that kind of movie, I think, for me, where it's like, I think people, I think that you definitely can have fun watching this one and seeing these performances again and again.
Thank you. Yeah, well, I really hope so. So we've been quite happy with the response so far. So yeah, long may it continue. Hopefully, we'll get a similarly nice response when it comes out in the UK.
Yeah. I think for people listening to this that that are in the UK, I think this is a movie that just, I think it's just a fun movie, and I think that sounds like such an easy thing to pull off, to make a movie fun. But I also think too, like, I know a lot of my friends sometimes would use fun as almost a reductive thing. Like, well, the movie wasn't that good, but it was fun, and that's not kind of what this is. This is more like, in a way, that there's I don't know how to explain it, but the fun is in seeing the performances and seeing the story develop in a way that you just don't always see in modern action movies. I think that I really appreciated.
Yeah, I think we just wanted to make something engaging and fun, where you could get behind the characters. And they used to make these kind of films in the 80s where they would be there to entertain you, really. So the film doing well could be a consequence of the film being enjoyable, whereas maybe a lot of the times these days, it's this is even in mainstream movies as well, that it's all about pushing out a product, and you're not that concerned if people enjoy it or want to go and revisit it.
Yeah, and I think that's a huge piece here. I mean, I on Twitter one time, recently, actually a little bit before this film came out, somebody had put up a poll about, like, oh, which, classic production company would you want to revise? I think, or revive, and I think it was like, PM, Canon, kind of the usual suspects from that time. And Jonathan Southcott was actually in that thread, and he was like, hey, we think we're already reviving it with Shogun, and I think that's true. Only I think there's something a little bit more special going on with Shogun, that is even kind of taking it to a kind of a different level from what like, from a PM standpoint, right? Obviously it's hard to compete nowadays with budgets, with the car flips and all of that kind of thing. But
yeah,
also too, I can't think of a PM film that had a kind of an ensemble cast that this has, where you had everybody getting the kind of material they did, that just had a lot of fun on screen. I think there's an attention to the story and development here that you generally wouldn't get in a PM flick. And I think that's an area where I think Shogun is even sort of doing a better job in that sense. That I think almost like, wanting to be another PM is almost maybe selling Shogun short, in that sense, that like that there's even something better happening here, I think, especially with the names that Jonathan and now Daniels really are able to bring, and the performances that they bring in a movie like this. It's yeah, it takes this kind of movie to a different level for me.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to think so. I think that's also, just generally in the sort of the DTV landscape, you can't do what you used to do, when PM were as you say, making those films where there would be 10 car flips and, 20 explosions in a film. You can't bring that level of action, but what you can do is, make the stories engaging, because, even as much as I love PM, I might watch some films and then you're almost wanting to skip to the action where, but, we wanted to make engaging characters that were likable and have interesting kind of dynamics. So that was very much what we were kind of leaning on with this one.
Yeah, and I think that's another point maybe to make about this movie, is that there isn't a scene that like a dialogue-driven scene that feels like it goes on too long, but also that isn't like, I don't know if compelling is the right word, but isn't entertaining. I think is probably the best way. Like, again, there's the scene where the guys have made the decision that, Nick Moran has sort of convinced them, like, okay, let's go get revenge for Lee Majors. And they're sitting at the pub at Ian Ogilvy's pub that he has, and they're kind of going through like what they have for weapons. And that scene is just a ton of fun. And I think without the performances there, and I think without the writing and sort of the way it moves along, I think that's the kind of scene that I've seen films either do too long or do in a way that isn't as engaging. And it's sort of one of those scenes that really comes together and works. And there isn't any actual action in that scene, right? There's no, nothing's being blown up or anything like that. But yet it's a fun scene. It's not a kind of scene where I'm like you said, I'm not like, okay, let's just get on with it and, get the guys in the car and have them go blow up the one of Louis Mandylor's clubs. It was a fun scene that I enjoyed watching as it unfolded.
Yeah, I mean, those were the scenes that I particularly enjoyed writing the most. And it was, they're the kind of scenes that really kind of make you engage with the characters and, really make you want to see them win at the end, basically.
Yeah, which is it's the most important piece of it, I think. This was there's a movie that I reviewed recently for the site called Vendetta that was like one of those sort of newer Bruce Willis films, and so it didn't have the group dynamic that this had, but it had the similar hero dynamic in the sense that you have the former special forces guy. In fact, it was Clive Stannard, who also is from England, but was playing an American in that film, which again, another thing that it seems like in American distributors, like they tend to want UK actors to use American accents, which I don't quite get, because as Americans, it makes the character more unique in that sense if you do that. But if you have them use their natural accents. But anyway, but in that movie, you had Theo Rossi playing the bad guy. He was just a lot of fun as a bad guy. He was, like we talked about, chewing up scenery and playing this really, really rough guy. But then the hero wasn't compelling at all. And I think that, the hero was very one note. It was just, here he is with his beard, he's grimacing, and he's got his former special forces background, and he wants revenge. And it's almost like you had the same story, right? The same idea of wanting, revenge against baddies. But the execution was just with Renegades was just so much better kind of all around, that again, it was one of those things that there was never a sense that I was ever going to root for Louis Mandylor the way I was rooting for Theo Rossi in Vendetta. It was just never a question of that I was always going to root for these guys. I always wanted to see them succeed in the end. And even though they have an underdog quality to them, there's almost a sense too that the way that they were written, that there was an underdog quality, but also like these guys aren't going to know what hit them quality as well. Like they don't know who they messed with quality, which I liked too, that you were able to sort of mitigate those two vibes of it, that we want to see these baddies get their comeuppance and see it at the hands of these heroes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So that was very much in my mind when I was writing that, that I wanted them to, they're over the hill, but they're still competent. So that was very important, to sort of not just make too many kind of old jokes throughout the thing. You want to sort of reference it, but not, overdo it. And yeah, we wanted this kind of underdog sense, but in the end, we want it to seem feasible that these guys can beat Mandalore and his gang.
Yeah, and I mean it's an interesting thing because I know recently I was on the Exploding Helicopter podcast with Will from Exploding Helicopter, and we were talking about the movie Soldier Boys, where they Michael Dudikoff brings a bunch of kids from a juvenile prison to Vietnam to fight, and they're suddenly trained. But I think there is an aspect of it that this idea that because a lot of times gangs, I think maybe in real life maybe they do employ former military personnel, but for the most part, right, there's a certain tactical training that you'd get in special forces in the military that Louis Mandylor's gang wouldn't have, like they wouldn't understand. And I think this movie does a good job of that, of like, yes, these guys are underdogs and they're older, they're over the hill, but they have an understanding. And of course, also to bringing Nick Moran's character, who's younger in, I think also helps the sense that like you feel like he's kind of almost the maybe like the anchor for the team, or he's sort of the one who's most capable in that sense. But I like the way the film kind of did that like these guys kind of know how to go into an environment and take it over in a way that the gang is not expecting because they've never really encountered anything like that before.
Yeah, exactly. That's what we were going for. And then obviously Nick being a little bit younger, he's the one that has the kind of toe-to-toe fist fight at the end. So from that regard, that was more logical. So we were very careful on what we had each individual kind of doing, and then we knew that Nick Moran was with youth on his side a little bit more, and then he could be the one that has the physical scraps.
Yeah, I think of like Paul Barber's scenes in the film, and again the one where he's at the bar with Nick Moran where they're doing reconnaissance, or when he goes into the club, right? Like he's acting like he's a John going in to patronize this club with human trafficking, and sort of the way he's interacting with the woman in that scene, and I should have her name up, but I think she was recently spotlighted on the Instagram, by the Shogun Instagram, her character. Yeah, I think it's Laura Pictet, I think is her name.
Yeah, playing Sophia.
So yeah.
Yeah.
And so like her interaction with Paul Barber, I think, again, it was one of those things where, like you said, like, obviously age can be a factor in these movies. And I think you run into that situation like Liam Neeson in Taken, where it's like they're just cutting scenes together to make it look like he's doing all of this stuff, and you almost don't know if you can believe it or not. Whereas, Paul Barber gets a scene here where he's interacting with her. Again, it's more of like a strategic vibe than it is an out and out action kind of thing. And he's of course bringing a kind of fun to it that, again, like you wouldn't think that a hero interacting with a victim of human trafficking could have any kind of fun or levity to it, but it worked. It all worked in that sense. And again, you're just, because part of it is, I think, is because Paul Barber on the inside is getting the gang ready to come in and sort of take this whole group down. So all of these women are going to be kind of freed from this situation eventually. Maybe that helps with that, but it worked in a way that I don't think, if you had told me this is what this scene is going to look like, I'd be like, I don't know if that would work that way, but it all definitely did.
Yeah, I think we were very careful throughout in each set piece that we made it feel believable. We gave it a sense of being like a caper as well, so that there's a slight sense of fun to each little set piece as well.
Yeah, and again, it's the kind of thing that I think, again, thinking maybe another juxtaposition is that Acts of Violence movie with Bruce Willis, where that was again, another movie about human trafficking, and it was all much more grim and serious, which, again, human trafficking is not a fun thing. It's not something that should be treated lightly or fun. But I think when you introduce human trafficking as an element, again, it's that kind of baddie in a can approach where there's nothing worse than that as a baddie than doing something like that. So definitely we want to see him taken down. And so then I think there's that challenge of being able to introduce moments of levity when you've got something so serious as that. And I think that's something that this movie pulls off really well between, the writing and the scenes and then the actors and the performances to just keep the movie fun throughout, even if that's going to be the construct that we want to see this baddie taken down for.
Yeah, very much so. So, this was always something that we really wanted to sort of pull off. We want the film to be fun, not too kind of grim, and we wanted to feel logical in the way that they take the bad guys down.
Yeah, and it definitely it all comes together. I think that this movie just completely works. As we're kind of running up on time here, Tom, is there anything else about the film that we didn't mention that you wanted to mention?
I think I just wanted to briefly mention Lee Majors. I was really sort of, obviously he's so well known, and everyone knows him from TV, and lots of movie appearances. It's just what he kind of brings to the film is so fantastic. He's just got that kind of gravitas and that charisma that so few actors have. It's almost a little bit in the same way that Harrison Ford has that real kind of power as well. Obviously Lee Majors had that a little bit more infamy in TV rather than the movies like Harrison Ford did, but he just has that real kind of strong screen presence, and I think he's kind of effortlessly cool in the film. It's inevitable what's going to happen, and that he's then going to be off the film to an extent, but his presence kind of continues to be felt throughout, I think. And I think that's another important thing. It's something we wanted in the script, but it's also something that you can't just write. It needs someone with that kind of level of gravitas to really, really pull off, where you still kind of feel his presence, toward the end of the film, even though he dies, toward the beginning.
Yeah, that's a really great point, because without that performance that he gives early on, there almost is no movie, right? Because you don't believe why these guys would be going in for this revenge piece. So yeah, that's a really great point that I like I said, I forgot to mention is how great he was in this, because you're right, that presence that he brings early on, it does really pervade the film throughout.
Yeah, I mean, he's like properly old school superstar. So he's got that that really great screen presence, and I think he has such a strong presence in such a short amount of time that it kind of lingers through the film, and I think there's very few actors that could do that. So we're kind of blessed that he's a good friend of Jonathan's, I think.
yeah, and that's a good point too, because I think a lot of times these revenge movies, part of the reason why they don't work is that the motive for the revenge maybe sometimes fades, or sometimes it's more like just a damsel in distress motive, like maybe the main character. I think of Scott Adkins. I don't know how many movies he's done where he has a child who's been kidnapped that he has to go and do some job for the baddies. He's being forced to because he's being manipulated or something like that. This is a situation where, yeah, somebody gets murdered early on, and we have to sort of feel that presence. I mean, again, going back to that Vendetta movie where the main character's daughter is murdered early on, and then his wife is murdered slightly after that, and it's almost just kind of like things that happen in the movie. Whereas, yeah, like you said, there's that inevitability that this is going to happen to him, but he's been so big to that point that, I mean, I just think about the very first scene he has where he finds Nick Moran sleeping on the park bench, and he sort of lifts him up and it says, okay, come, you can stay at my place, you can do it. From the moment he has that scene, like you said, there's a presence there that really just sort of perpetuates throughout the film.
Yeah, so I think I knew sort of from the beginning that he would be in the film, so I could naturally write something to suit him and to really kind of hopefully have that. But then obviously you're hoping that he's on his A game, which he was always going to be, because he's very good friends with Jonathan and Janine, so we knew he was going to bring his A game. And he's just got that really kind of strong presence, and I think that really benefits the film.
Yeah, and strong presence too, and almost like in a paternal sense, right? That like
Yeah,
which I think is really, really, really important to how the movie works. And even though the guys on his team are his age, he's the leader of the, of that squadron. So in that sense, he's more like their leader than their father. But I think, with Nick Moran's character, and of course Patsy Kensit, his character is her father in that. But that sort of that paternal sense to it, I think that is something that you see in some really good movies that kind of involve revenge, where it's like a sort of a community father character, or community father figure, or community mother figure is murdered, and the community rallies around that person. And I got that sense here from him, that his character was one that all the other characters had been so influenced by that they couldn't not carry this out.
exactly. Yes, I mean, we always knew that he would be playing that character in particular. And that was a big part of the reason, not purely because of a limit in time, but we wanted it to have the impact that it does. It's always gonna have the most impact if you've got the $6 million man, as that kind of central figure who gets killed off.
Yeah, it's funny with him. Yeah, because again, yeah, you think of him as the $6 million man. Here in the United States, one of the retro channels, they do play $6 million man, but they also play Big Valley, the western that he did, and it's kind of funny to see him at a very young age in Big Valley, where he's like, he's not this paternal figure that he is now, but he still has that presence, that he's still, every time there's a scene, it's almost like when he steps into the scene, it's almost like there's nobody else in that scene with him. And of course, yeah, $6 million man is an obvious one, but yeah, I think you're right that when you can get someone like him attached to a movie and have him play a role that is so vital, but yet so short on screen time. Yeah, to have that pulled off, I think you're right. It was a very integral part of this movie that I don't think the movie works if he doesn't play this role and do it the way he does it.
Yeah, yeah, that's very much it. Yeah, so yeah, we were delighted to have him on board and see him knock it out the park.
Yeah, yeah, it's another great thing. I don't know. I guess I missed him in talking about the movie because because again his character does die off early on, and so then it's all the other characters who are sort of developing around him. But like you said, his presence never leaves the movie. It's always a part of what's happening in the film.
Yeah, definitely. That was very important. A really big aspect of what we wanted in the film.
Yeah, excellent. Now, anything else? Anything else that we may have missed as we were talking about this that you want people to know about the movie?
Um, no, I think we've covered most of it. I think just that
Yeah.
I'm really happy that people are enjoying it so far, and hopefully they'll continue to do so.
Yeah, I think this is just a movie that, I mean, when I posted about it on, especially on Facebook, I tend to get more interactions on Facebook when I post than on Twitter, because I think just sort of maybe the nature of what's going on with Twitter right now. But a lot of people were responding like, "Wow, that cast! Like, I need to, just to see that cast, or see what happens with that cast." And I think anybody who's going into it with that mindset, this is definitely going to deliver. I think there's a lot of times when you see names on the tin and then you watch the movie and you're like, like I don't, I could have, okay, Eric Roberts was sitting behind a desk for one scene. That's, even with Michael Pare, who only has that short scene, or Dana Trejo has a couple of short scenes, they're really good, engaging scenes. And then of course the rest of the cast they're exactly like what you would think when you see their names listed. They're exactly what you think, maybe even better than what you'd be expecting for them coming in.
Yeah, and we just gave them the platform to really do what they do best.
Yeah, so I think so right now in the United States, you can get this on streaming. You can rent it streaming, and I think this is worth the rental money. Normally I push people to wait to for something to be free on a free streamer, but this is definitely worth going on Amazon and paying the new release rental fee. I think this is a really great Saturday night action movie. I think for people that are looking for something to watch. I mean, you can watch it any night of the week, of course, but I think this is a one. You don't always get a good. I think for me at least, when it comes to a good Saturday night movie, very seldom is it a new movie that I look at and go, that's my Saturday night movie. Usually it's something from the past. I'm usually picking up an old one. So for me to say that a new movie is a good Saturday night movie, I think that should maybe tell people, how much enjoyment they're going to get out of this.
Well, that's good to hear. And hopefully, there'll be plenty more that feel the same.
Yeah, and then for people listening, so this episode is going to be coming out before the UK release. So if you're listening to this and it's before January 30th, that's when the UK streaming release will be, and then February 6th it will be the DVD release. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So for the physical media fans, that's the key there. I don't know in the United States if a physical release is slated yet. Because I know, again, there are a lot of people that like to get physical media.
I've not heard anything yet, but I'm sure that at some point there will be.
Yeah, I think at least for right now, I think the Prime streaming price. I think it's worth the rental on Prime for people. I think that's probably the main one. I think in the United States, I think we also like with my cable company, I can rent movies directly through my cable company as well, through Xfinity. So it's another way you can rent this. But I think, looking at a good Saturday night, queue this up, maybe go to get, some I don't know, some Indian food takeout or something, something or pizza or something like that. Kind of just do the whole shebang. This movie is definitely worth all that. So I think, for audiences in America, then I think I think we do have some German listeners. In Germany, there is a DVD release.
Yeah, so it's already out on DVD and Blu-ray in Germany.
So it's definitely available, and I think everybody should check this one out. I think also too, kind of just in talking about independent film, I think this is for us as action movie fans, if we want to keep movies coming out that are like this, I think this for us to back a movie like this, it sends a message to distributors that like this is what we should be looking for. This kind of movie does work if it doesn't. The churn and burn approach maybe isn't as effective, or I don't know. I think we can send a message by supporting movies like this. I think that's an important thing as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think they kind of live or die on how they do, and I'm hoping that it does well.
Yeah, so I think for everybody out there, this is definitely something to check out. It's definitely worth looking at. Yeah, Tom, anything else that you want to plug while we're still here?
No, I just say, if you haven't watched Renegades yet, give it a watch, and then UK fans, it's just around the corner.
Yeah, and definitely worth checking out. I would check it out as soon as you get a chance to. And it's definitely, I think even if whether you're watching by yourself or you gather up some friends to watch it together, this is going to be a fun ride. I think you probably haven't had this much fun in an action movie in a while. I would say this is going to definitely this is definitely going to do the trick for you for sure.
Well, I like to think so. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, thank you again for coming on, Tom. This was a really great conversation. It was really great to kind of get more insight sort of into how the film went. So I always enjoy a conversation like this.
Yeah, thanks for having me on again, Matt. Good to talk again.
Yes, it was great talking with you as well. And anybody else, great. Thanks for listening. And we'll talk soon. Bye, everybody.